What's going on, everyone? Finally, I have another graphical evolution video, and this time we'll be taking a look at a fairly popular PlayStation exclusive called Killzone. I chose Killzone for this graphical evolution for a few reasons. One, because the series started in 2004 and has since only came out with 4 games total, not counting handhelds. So there's a pretty big year gap between the games, and it should be pretty interesting to see how the graphics improved over the years. The third reason is because I wanted to cover a series that had an HD remaster, and finally, because I like the games. Well, 2 of them at least. So having said that, we have the original game. Honestly, I never liked it. I thought that the gameplay was bland, and the graphics didn't really do anything for me, even at the time the game came out. I didn't even realize this until I was doing a very brief amount of research on the games, but the original Killzone didn't have that great of reviews. Graphically, as I said, the game does nothing for me. It just looks dull and uninteresting. The color palette is also very meh, very monotone. And I get it, it's a war zone, it's not meant to be colorful, but I don't know, that sort of thing just doesn't translate well in most games. Everything just starts to blend in and look exactly the same. With the HD remake of the original Killzone, they remastered it on 720p. Of course, it looks miles better, although I noticed that there was an annoying amount of, static going on in the background, almost like a grain type filter was put on, that I didn't even notice in the PS2 version of the game. However, going back through my footage, the static is actually noticeable on the PS2 version as well. It kind of makes me wonder why they didn't remove it, or at least make it much less noticeable when they remastered it. Anyway, apart from that, the game runs much smoother than its PS2 counterpart, as one would expect, but unfortunately it doesn't make the game any more fun. Killzone 2 was released 5 years later on the PS3. I don't think words can express just how much of a massive leap in graphics this is from the original game. Character models look fantastic, including the Hellghast. In the original, they just look like, whatever, guys with helmets on, but in this game they really did make the Hellghast's appearance very intimidating, which is exactly what you want from a game like this. Another massive change was the cutscenes. Just take a look at the difference here from the HD remaster to Killzone 2. I don't think I even need to discuss how much better it looks in comparison.
Shit! What do we do, sir? We have to get back to the main line. Jesus! Covering fire!
Damn it. Our ass is kicked.
The animations on this game, and really any installments after this, are just brilliant. The way the AI moves, whether they're walking, running, getting shot, or even dying, it looks way more realistic than in most games at the time Killzone 2 came out. To be honest, the animations look much better than in some of the more recent games that have come out, which is actually quite sad when you think about it. Killzone 3 released only a few years later. Not only was it the first in the series to have an option to be played in 3D, it was also the first to include the use of a PlayStation Move. So if you have a 3D TV or are one of the 4 people in the world that has a PlayStation Move, me included, then good for you. While I don't have too much to say about the third installment, it is a very pretty game. Not as drastic of a graphical change compared to Killzone 1 going into 2 for obvious reasons, but you can tell that they took what worked and made it better, made everything more polished, detailed, crisper, if that's a word. The biggest noticeable change for me was the improved lighting, and that they made the game much more colorful than the previous 2. I love the change personally, because you can argue that Killzone 2 had somewhat of a dull look to it, and I guess that's true, but I don't know if you could say the same thing about Killzone 3. The guns, the textures, character models, all of it looks wonderful. As for the game itself, I love it. It's definitely my favorite Killzone out of the 4. The gameplay, like the graphics, has been polished up, making it much more fluid than ever before. You don't feel as clunky and awkward like you do in Killzone 2. The online seems to be the best in terms of overall balancing, which in turn made it much more fun, because I don't feel like I'm dying in bullshit ways all the time like I did in its next installment. I'll touch on that a little bit later. Interestingly, the multiplayer's graphics of both Killzone 2 and 3 aren't nearly as good as its single players. Mostly due to the same problem I have with the original Killzone, everything has this static, grainy look. Can someone explain to me why developers do this grain static effect on their games? Because Killzone is absolutely not the only one that does this. Killzone 4, otherwise known as Shadowfall, is the latest installment to the franchise. It was a launch title for the PS4, and many people, including myself, were excited for the game. Graphically, it was, and still to this day, is amazing. I mean, just look at it. You could tell the developers went through a lot of time and effort making this game look as great as it does. The lighting, the coloring, everything looks significantly better than before, and honestly, much better than any of the other first-person shooter games that came out around the same time as Shadowfall. Even some of the more recent first-person shooters don't look as good as this. Although, there's a lot of controversy about this game. Shadowfall was advertised to run at 1080p. It even says so on the back of the box. Here's the thing. Shadowfall runs in native 1080p, 30 frames per second on the single player. The multiplayer, from what I understand, is 900p scaled up to 1080. The frame rate is also 60 frames per second, although it's not locked. Meaning that most of the time, yeah, it'll run at 60 frames per second, but the frames will drop periodically, like when a lot of shit is happening on screen or whatever else it's making it drop. One gamer got so butthurt over it and filed a lawsuit with Sony, claiming that it was misleading and false advertising. However, after a little back and forth, the case was ultimately thrown out. And rightly so, because if you really think about it, false advertising is everywhere you go. From as seen on TV commercials, to pictures of fast food, to even fuel economy on cars. There's nothing we can do about it. If the guy would have won the case, what's stopping you or me from suing any other companies that misrepresent a product on pretty much a daily basis? Nothing. But besides that, looking at this game, I can't help but be amazed by the level of detail the developers went through. Even on things you don't typically pay that much attention to, like the foliage on trees to the stitching on your gloves and clothing. The setting of the game is much more colorful than the previous ones and takes place 30 years later, which becomes apparent due to the sci-fi elements that are thrown into the game. The sad thing is, Shadowfall wasn't that great of a game, both in the campaign and the multiplayer. I won't say why in case I ever do decide to review it, but even pretty visuals can't save a game from having a crummy campaign and an equally frustrating multiplayer where the easiest way to play is to have the most overpowered abilities and gadgets. That just about covers it, everyone. I want to thank you all very much for watching, and in the next graphical evolution, I'm debating on either doing Crisis or SOCOM US Navy SEALs. Who knows? What would you rather see? Leave me a comment down below letting me know your opinion, and until next time, everyone, have a good one.